Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating Spaces for Girls in Your Community. My name is Miriam Zaidi, and I'm the Girls Action Communications Coordinator. In a couple of minutes, I will be passing the mic to Simone and Juniper from our Girls Action team. We are really fortunate to have them with us today. I'm happy to see some familiar names joining us for today's webinar. For those returning, welcome back. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, I wanted to briefly introduce you to the Girls Action Foundation before passing things along to my colleagues. So very quickly, Girls Action Foundation is a national nonprofit that works to empower girls. We are based in Montreal, where we run local girls programs, and we work with some 250 partners across the country who run their own girls programs. We also provide leadership training, organize networking events, and do other things that connect girls and young women. In terms of impact, nationally we reach about 60,000 girls and young women located in remote, marginalized, and urban communities, including the North. So just before introducing Simone and Juniper, I'd like to walk you through the interactive side of today's webinar. So you'll see on your screen a number of different information displays and panels that will be changing throughout the presentation. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a panel, a window titled Q&A. Here's where you can ask questions and interact with Simone, Juniper, myself, and other participants. If you have a question or comment during the presentation, type it into the Q&A box, hit enter, and it will be recorded there. By default, the question will be visible to everyone. If you would prefer to submit your question privately, click on the down arrow at the bottom of the Q&A box and select my name, Miriam Zaidi, instead of all participants. The question will then come only to me. During Juniper and Simone's presentation, they will be answering questions from the Q&A box. So feel free to ask your questions as they come. You don't have to save them until the end of the presentation. We will also be taking polls throughout the presentation. They won't take more than a couple of minutes, and they'll be quite simple. I wanted to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, including the question period. This will be posted online. I'll send everyone a link to the recording. Finally, at the end of the webinar, a survey will pop up. Please fill it out. We'd love to hear your feedback. With that covered, I'd like to introduce Juniper and Simone. Juniper Glass is the Girls Action Senior Director, Strategy and Partnerships. Juniper has a passion for authentic social change initiatives and a long-standing goal to channel resources to the grassroots. Juniper joined the Girls Action team in 2005, bringing with her many years of experience in progressive organizations, including the College of Midwives of British Columbia, OXFAM-Canada, and groups working to create food security and affordable housing. In her role as Girls Action Director of Strategy and Partnerships, she co-wrote Beyond Appearances, a brief on the main issues facing girls in Canada. Simone Vigier, our other presenter, is the Girls Action Local Programs Manager. Simone has been with Girls Action since 2012, developing and facilitating programs for girls in partnership with schools and community organizations. She is passionate about the power of media projects and designing engaging programs with youth for social change. For over 10 years, she has led creative community initiatives with youth-serving organizations such as les YMCA du Québec, Concordia University, McGill University, Dawson College, ID Visual Arts Academy, and the Siegel Center for Performing Arts. She is pursuing a Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology and possesses a diploma in Digital Technologies in the Design Arts practice with an educational background in Communication Studies and Video Production. She is also an experimental documentary filmmaker. So now I will pass things along to Juniper. So just be patient for a moment while I pass the mic.
Hi everyone, this is Juniper. I am going to open a poll right now before we begin, just asking you what your experience is working with girls or coordinating youth programs and so on, just to get an idea of who is participating. So you'll see the question there. So the sources for this presentation are um, two main documents that Girls Action Foundation has produced. One is Beyond Appearances, a brief on the main issues facing girls in Canada, which was published last year and commissioned by Status of Women Canada. It's an amazing sort of repository of information, so I really encourage you to go check it out when you need information on specific issues facing girls or rationale for why you're doing girl-specific programming. The other is Amplify, designing spaces and programs for girls, and it is a toolkit which has everything from starting your organizing to designing specific workshops, and is also very, very, very helpful. So thank you so much for responding to the poll. And we see that we have quite a range of experiences. Folks who are currently working with girls, about a third of you. Others who are working with youth in a mixed gender context, so both boys and girls together, and perhaps trans youth as well. Yeah, okay, great. So we have quite a range of experiences. What we're going to talk about for a few minutes are some of the very high-level key issues that we discovered when we did the work on Beyond Appearances. And then we will go on. Simone will talk about the Girls Action approach to creating effective girls programs and engaging fun girls programs. And then at the end, we'll have a few minutes where both of us will share some of our ideas about organizing. So specifically, we were thinking about folks who are at the early stages of developing an initiative for girls. So that's what we'll cover today. So first of all, in terms of the main issues facing girls in Canada, violence, mental health, things to do with sexual health and substance use, and education and career prospects were some of the main things that we covered in Beyond Appearances. And of course, we discovered that they are interconnected, which you probably know if you do work with youth. So in terms of violence, I think the key point is that we sometimes tend to think of violence as just outstanding acts of violence that are visible with the eyes and are very obvious. But the fact is that in girls' lives, there's a lot of undercurrents of violence, such as sexual harassment in schools or on the streets. One of the things that kind of also stood out to us in our research was realizing that when we talk about missing and murdered Aboriginal women, that actually about a fifth of those are actually girls under 18. So we're talking about a girls issue here as well. In terms of mental health, this was also quite startling. Of all the gender age groupings in Canadian society, teen girls and young women have the highest rates of things like suicidal thinking, depression, anxiety disorders, hospitalization for self-injury, and so on. Self-harm in some communities is quite a problem and what self-harm is deliberate injuring of oneself. So cutting is probably the best known of this phenomenon. One of the studies, the few sort of surveys provincially is in BC. They always ask about self-harm, and they found that 20% of teen girls did in the last year hurt themselves deliberately. So these are all concerning things to do with mental health, and what we found is that researchers talk about how gender socialization leads girls and women to kind of internalize difficulties. If they experience something challenging in life, that they are more likely to keep those problems to themselves or to blame themselves, to think that there's something wrong with them, which may be the link of why mental health issues are such a problem. At the same time, we don't think that medicalization of mental health issues is the whole answer either, because the use of antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs are also on the rise among teen girls in Canada. So we think that this internalization factor is one of the key reasons why girls programs are so very important, because they can create a safe space where girls can find out that they're not alone, that others may be facing similar challenges, and they can also see their challenges in a social context instead of just as like their fault or individual experience. In terms of health, some of the interesting things are that binge drinking and alcohol use is on the rise in Canada. Tobacco use is going down among girls, but drinking seems to be one outlet that girls may use to cope with challenges. In terms of sexual health, there's been a lot of talk about hypersexualization of girls and why this is a problem. And we like to turn that question around and say, you know, all girls, all youth have a sexual essential aspect to themselves, and that's normal and healthy. And when we look at the facts, the age of first sexual intercourse has not actually gotten younger. It's remained about 16 years old for both boys and for girls over the last several decades. But what we do see that is concerning about sexual health is how girls may or may not be taking care of themselves. So for example, sexually transmitted infection rates are on the rise, which, you know, probably indicates that they're being pressured into unsafe sex and so on. These are all concerning. In terms of education and career, obviously we live in Canada. It's a very privileged society. We have ostensibly free education for all and so on. And many girls and young women are entering post-secondary education, which are all successes. But what we learned in terms of education, again, is what is not on the surface. So for example, in a poll of youth all across the country, 1 in 4 girls said that she did not feel safe at school. So this should be a concern. What environment does that create for learning if girls do not feel safe at school, and why don't they feel safe? And then, of course, we also see that many of the things like the wage gap is still not closing, even though many more young women have university degrees or training and are entering non-traditional careers. These are all things that are reasons why the work is not finished. There's still more to be done in terms of gender equality. So what is going on? You know, are things getting worse? Some people say to us, well, teenage girls, they're just angst-ridden and that's just normal, it's always been that way. So we do question that, but what we've found is that it seems to be, from talking to our network members on the ground across Canada, from our work with girls here, and then also from research, is that it seems like pressures on girls are increasing, so that there does seem to be a shift happening, that girls growing up now are experiencing more pressures from more sources than, say, their mother's generation. So there's this sense that, you know, both traditional and modern gender roles need to be upheld, that girls have to be kind of successful at everything or expected to be everything to everyone. And then the other aspect, which we think is really important, is the intersecting issues. So girls don't just experience challenge because of gender, they experience challenges because we live in a society with multiple types of oppression and power and privilege and so on. And so those play a big role in girls' lives. So like I mentioned at the beginning, all of these issues are interconnected, and we really encourage you in your work to look at those. And then the other issue around marginalization is to bring an awareness of systems of power and privilege in our society, that many girls have to grapple with multiple barriers and pressures, not just those to do with gender. So, did we have a, yeah. Great. So thank you, Ruthie, for asking your question about making girl-specific programs welcoming to trans girls. And that is something that we also think is really important. We haven't developed our a publicly shared approach to that, but definitely we want to do that because it's really important to us and many youth groups across the country. So Simone will address that issue when she talks about programming. So I'm going to pass this off to Simone.
Hi, everyone. This is Simone on the webinar. Thank you, Juniper, for the first half of the presentation. I think it adds a lot of context to the question of why do we speak, why do we want to work with girls, and also the issues that emerge across Canada and in specific communities inform approaches to designing spaces with girls. So the second half of this presentation is going to speak a bit on how Girls Action works with girls groups in Montreal. For the past 4 seasons now, I have worked in schools around Montreal. We do girls programs in 2 elementary schools and 2 high schools, and I've also had the chance to facilitate punctual workshops and workshop series in partnership with other youth groups and other organizations in Montreal. So yeah, let's get started on the second half of the presentation. So I'm going to begin just by speaking a bit about Girls Action's principles, which inform our approach to creating programs with girls. The first approach that we hold dear to our practice is an approach that's informed by the popular education model. Popular education is a great way to do programs with girls. And the model starts with girls' lived experiences and helps put into perspective what is going on in their lives and helps them to be active participants in making changes in their lives, communities, and other domains. Contrary to traditional hierarchical education, where experts hold the knowledge, this model is grounded in the belief that everyone is an expert and argues that learning is not a top-down process, that learning is experiential. So what can that look like in the girls' programs? It means that the girls should take the lead in naming what activities they want to do, and as a result, will raise issues that are important to them. So as a facilitator or a program coordinator, the focus is on what the girls are experiencing and wondering about what they find cool. Yeah. So in a step-by-step process, what that could look like, you know, is starting your programming or starting an activity with get-to-know-you activities, encouraging girls to tell stories about what's important in their lives, and then following that as a facilitator or programmer to begin to identify patterns by noticing themes that are reported, that are repeated in girls' experiences as they share stories. Also, even better, asking the participants to recognize patterns and themes themselves. So an example would be, you know, noting that different people in the group experience bullying or cliques. The next step would be to, you know, inform yourself, find some information, find some guest speakers that can speak to questions raised by the group. So for example, if the girls are in competition with each other, you know, seek out someone who can come speak to them about solving the resolution. The next step would be to, you know, once you've noticed some real issues, the girls have noticed real issues, this is the point. It can be a troubling point of the programming process, but the next step is to strategize and plan for an action. Think of options in the group that can make the situation better. Brainstorm and think through different ideas. So for example, you know, what are some different ways that girls can effectively intervene when they see cliques forming or bullying in their schools? And then finally, in the popular education spiral, not that it's a step-by-step process, but that, you know, this is a process that we try our best to integrate into our girls' programs. you know, we do an action. Often it's arts-based. It can be a zine, it can be a video, it can be a photograph, but it's an action for the girls to share what they have reflected upon, the solutions that they've built together, and share it with their community, whether it's other girls, whether it's their siblings, family members, friends, politicians, teachers. Share what they have to say, and the cycle, the popular education cycle, can continue from there, broadening the conversation. But the key in terms of planning programs and working with girls is to stay flexible and adaptable. You know, often we'll switch gears in the middle of a session or on a week-by-week basis, change our approach depending on the girls' interests and their needs, what they would like to do. So I spent extra time talking about popular education because it is very dear to the way that we work in local programs. But another principle that is very important to the approach that we take to working with girls, and Juniper spoke about this earlier, is an integrated feminist analysis. How this is useful in girls' programs is taking the issues away from the personal and reflecting as a group on how each girl's experiences will change depending on power systems that exist in our society, whether it's gender identity, economic status, race, culture. It's acknowledging that as girls we all have different experiences, and through that diversity we want to build communities and organize girls to create transformational change. So that leads me to the third approach, which is transformational change. For us, the way we see that in working with girls that are usually 10 to 16 years old is looking at both an individual and collective action to address any form of discrimination or oppression that the girls may live in their lives. And that means that there's change on multiple levels. And the girls may share what they have to say with different audiences. However, we do also work with a critically asset-based approach. So what that means for us is taking these reflections and these critical perspectives, acknowledging that girls face specific structural barriers, different structural barriers, but also to really emphasize the capacities and the assets that the girls have based off of their own realities and their own experiences. So we hope to build on the girls' strengths, and that, it also informs how we have an organic process, how we are constantly planning and programming with the girls based off of their input and their feedback. So these are also approaches and principles that are articulated quite well in the Amplify manual to planning spaces with girls, and I recommend reading about it more in depth. So the next slide that I decided to speak about, I kind of honed in on a few different steps in terms of our programming with girls that I find is really important, and I think this is a great transition to bring in Ruthie's question here. And if anybody else would like to respond to this question also, I will voice it through the webinar platform. There's a question here that asks, how do we make girl-specific programs welcoming to trans girls when our programs are called Girls, World, etc.? This is a question we bring at the local level. In Montreal, we often call our groups girls group, and questions are raised by all sorts of people, including boys in the school. Why are you meeting with girls? Why is this important? And especially with trans girls or folks who have more fluid gender identities or gender identities that are less of the norm. It's an important principle in the group to say that we are trying to create a safe space or a safer space that is comfortable and accessible to everyone. So, practically, Ruth, what we do is we try to ask questions that challenge assumptions, and we really try to bring the conversation to the point where we say, there are different ways of being a girl, and that we want to celebrate that diversity. And so we're actually, as a group, we tell ourselves that we define what it means to be girl, which means that the group is welcome to use who identify as female. You know, I also have spoken with other programmers who make a point of doing pronoun check-ins on a week-to-week basis, so that everybody is able to think about the assumption that we have fixed gender identity, and this is a conversation that can happen within the group. And also there's a great activity that I've seen facilitated called the Gender Bread activity, which is useful for younger girls who maybe have less of an awareness of the distinction between sex, gender, desire. It can really break those components down and be a beneficial conversation for all of the girls in the group. So I don't know if that, you know, if there's anybody else who would like to respond to that point of, you know, how to be trans inclusive when the word girl is in your program title. I'll just echo that, but I'm not seeing any responses right now. But if they come up, I will include them in. But yeah, so creating the space is key, and being intentional about those sorts of policies are important to make the space comfortable and welcoming to, you know, not only physically but also in the atmosphere level. And that is important also at the beginning because conflicts or intense topics can arise, and how you establish the group norms, the group values will shape how those conversations will continue later on. So, you know, group dynamics are really big for us in terms of how to work with girls. But just some quick little tips in terms of establishing and maintaining a positive group dynamic and a positive space is to, as a facilitator, to be prepared for planned and unplanned topics or conflicts that may arise. So to inform yourself on common misconceptions so that those can be addressed within the group, whether it's around sexual orientation, cultural stereotypes. As a facilitator, we often try and resolve those conflicts in our groups with the girls. That being said, I think it's important to know your limits and be conscious of which topics you're not comfortable of handling. And it's okay to say, you know, this conversation, I think there'll be another person who will be best to lead this conversation, and we can follow up with it on a later basis. And that's when working with community members, other folks who maybe have more knowledge than you or can speak to the girls in a more effective way, that's okay. As a facilitator, as a program coordinator, you're working with the girls to create a space where those conversations can happen. That being said, also, you know, breaks and energizers are really important, and at the end of the day, we do want to have fun and to celebrate. So, you know, that's something to keep in your back pocket, is always have a few energizers and icebreakers to lighten up those intense moments and to laugh and have fun. One activity that I wanted to talk about really briefly that we do in our girls programs are group agreements. This is another tool to creating a safe space. There are different ways that group agreements can happen, different tools that you can use, whether it's a flip chart or cards. But usually with us, we do it at the beginning of our program or at the beginning of a workshop, and there's a few basic steps. We encourage the girls to go through an individual reflection on one, you know, what do they think a safe space means, what contributes to a safe space, what they think they can contribute to the group in terms of making being in the girls program a positive experience for everyone. And then, you know, depending on the group's comfort level, the vibe, there are formats for each participant's input to be anonymous. Like the cards is a great way for girls just to share what their needs are, what they have to offer without necessarily exposing themselves. But we've also done group agreements where girls trace their hands. They're very proud of saying what they individually want to contribute to the group to make it a positive collective experience. So I'll have some photos here of some girls groups, some of the group agreements we've made. And in one of the girls groups, the photo on the bottom here, the girls enjoyed their agreement so much that on a weekly basis, they wanted to make a point of hanging it every time we met. Whereas the photo on the upper left, the girls decided to take our group agreement and make them positive messages that we would hang around the room. So the group agreement sets a great tone. It can also be a way for you to start to hone in on some issues and patterns between the group, and a chance for the girls to really start voicing their opinion and start thinking about group shared accountability. Yeah, so moving forward, as much as the girls can have ownership of the space is better. So the next tip that I have is that asking questions is really critical in terms of working with the girls. It's critical in terms of promoting critical thinking, but in the sense that there will be informal conversations where issues come up, where there are conflicts between the girls, and asking questions is a great way of slowing things down, of questioning the girls to think about their assumptions, to go beyond kind of the common flow of conversations. So some kind of questions we have, we ask often like what, so what, and now what, as a debrief. So if a girl says something that maybe stands out to you, you think could be rooted in something different, something serious or something shared, often we'll say, you know, what do you mean by that? So who do you think that affects? Now, who would you want to share that with, or what do you think you can do with it? And these questions help deepen learning. So these are some useful practices. I see there's a question here about about how to get the messages through advertising. I think I'm thinking that has to do with messages around girls' issues and how to get those girls' issues into advertising, which we could answer at the end. I think Juniper would be able to answer to that. But if there's a little bit of, if you could specify a little bit more about which messages you'd like to get into advertising, then we can respond to that question a little bit more concretely in a couple minutes. All right, so moving forward. Finally, you know, in a girls program, in a workshop, whether it's punctual, ongoing, at Girls Action, our programs are designed to support girls in coping with violence. And so, you know, there are different forms of violence, whether it's systemic, relational, or internalized. These are all tied to the issues that Juniper spoke about earlier. And, you know, these forms of violence, you know, with girls can lead to really painful feelings of fear, anxiety, anger, depression, hopelessness, and shame. You know, sometimes these emotions are also, you know, include just feeling cut off, isolated, and numb. Or they can involve, you know, sadness, grief, and a sense of loss. So, you know, when we're doing popular education workshops, we do invite participants to reflect or draw on their own experiences on a regular basis, which helps the group learn together. But it's likely that a participant will be reminded of or share, you know, experiences that were hurtful or harmful. So, you know, just some brief tips, because we would like to get to the question and answer period. You know, in terms of working with girls and young women to cope with these feelings that violence brings up, you know, and to help maintain a sense of safety in the group, you know, we do our best to let the girls talk, to give them a space to vent their feelings. You know, whether they feel unsafe or do feel safe, whether it's within the group or something that's happening at school or at home. That's what our girls group meets for. And, you know, if there is a girl who brings up an experience that seems to be, significant or distressing to another member of the group, you as a facilitator, you would actively need to decide whether it's appropriate to continue the conversation with the group, or whether this is a conversation that's better to be had alone or with another adult, whether it's a parent, a counselor, a friend. Those are decisions that can have to be made during a workshop, whether it's planned or unplanned. Another tip we have, just to create a sense of safety and have a sense of ownership for the girls to feel safe, is to review a safety plan with the girls. Meaning, in the case that a random something happens, whether it's environmental or something about security, safety, to go through a safety drills with the girls so that they know what to do in the case of an emergency. Also we recommend don't making impossible promises, except that there's only so much you can do for the girls, that you can try your best, and at the end of the day you are there to accompany them, to be a witness, to support, to reframe their experiences and create a space for them to make meaningful connections with each other. And also to work with community members who are experts, who are there with the shared goals of addressing issues that girls face and working with the girls. But yeah, so this is the information that I wanted to share, and I think that it's just helpful to, when you're working with girls around these issues, to really be conscious of the weak victim model, and to the strong perpetrator versus the weak victim model, and to really help girls understand in a larger context what their experiences are and how they can understand the root causes of bullying, for example, so they can seek out appropriate resources. So that's the end of my piece. There are some questions here, which is great. So Juniper and I will work together to answer these questions. So we have a question here. It's clarified. I'm interested in how to get this message through advertising, referring to the trans. How do you show in advertising that you're welcome to trans girls? So I'll pass the mic to Juniper. Just put it on mute for a moment. And
yeah, so in terms of expressing openness to trans youth, I think that with younger girls, you can sort of indicate that the group is open, for example, to all self-identified girls, and that at least opens the door for youth to think, okay, maybe I don't fit in these other spaces, maybe I will fit there. Or if they're older, like teenagers, I think just being explicit about it. For example, this group is open to all, self-identified girls and trans youth. And so there's a lot of youth groups these days that that are inclusive in that way. And then it might also be, it's very difficult for a lot of youth to step forward if they don't know that it will be a safe space. So you could also, for example, in your recruitment, give a way to get in touch with you, to say, are you not sure that this group is for you? Well, email me or text me, and we will find out. We'll discuss it together. So that's a way in your promotion of the group to have that kind of openness. The next thing that we wanted to talk about, feel free to ask any questions about the material that Simone covered in terms of facilitating and designing great girls groups. Yeah. So we have one question about issues, saying, I find it surprising that you've not found that girls start having sex earlier. So I had mentioned before that the average age of first sexual intercourse has remained at about 16. So it's being asked, how is sex being defined? I don't remember the exact source, but I'm guessing that it was sexual intercourse rather than, for example, oral sex or other types of interactions. And so in your community, you're seeing that because of things like access to pornography for youth becoming easier, that girls are being pressured into sex or are choosing to have sex at earlier and earlier, grade 7 and 8. So that is one of our participants who is sharing that experience. So I think it varies from community to community. But in terms of the Canadian statistics overall, that is what we learned about that particular issue in terms of age of first intercourse. But I think that you're right in that that's what we've heard from network members across the country, is that that pornography is doing sex ed in this country in many ways. Unfortunately, a lot of boys especially are accessing porn and then thinking that that is real, in the sense of that's what they should be doing as sexual beings. So it's quite disturbing, and we're definitely strong proponents of effective sex ed as a way to prevent violence, as a way to reduce and prevent violence in girls' lives. We have another question. How do you suggest getting girls involved in our programs? We have hardly any girls coming to our drop-in and programs. So I will pass it off to the program expert. One moment.
All right, so there's a question here about getting girls involved in your programs. Of course, it depends on where you're hosting the programs. If it's in a community center, I find it's really useful to work with other service providers, other recreational community activities, and also parents to discuss what's going on with girls, what are girls' interests in terms of activities. Often, dance groups, media projects, specific types of girls are interested in participating in activities where they get to express themselves, have fun together. So it depends on how you're presenting the project, the program. If we've found that it's less appealing for the girls if we say it's a girls group and we're going to sit around and talk. They want to do stuff. They want to know, why are we talking? So the more you can get to understand the girls, their interests, what they're passionate about, what they're living, then you can relate to them. Another effective approach is to go to where the girls are. So Girls Action, we do our year-round programs in schools. And in each school, the program looks very different because each context, reaching out to the girls, and the reasons why they participate in the girls program is very different. But, we work with a school-based advocate to promote the program with the girls, which means that we'll go around the classrooms, talk about, why is it fun to work with girls? Why is it fun to be in a girls group? Start talking to girls about what they see in their lives. We often work with guidance counselors, and we often do kind of like fun, interactive activities in the hallways, whether it's a photo booth or a survey or a word wall, just to get a bit of buzz and to let them know that we're there to have fun, and we know that the meaningful connections and the heartfelt conversations will come thereafter. But it's true, outreach, promotion, and outreach is really important, as well as retention. If you're doing a program that's ongoing, retention can be challenging, and so I think it's just about having a real connection with the girls, and sometimes doing punctual activities that are widespread to, increase folks' interest is strategic. So those are some ideas. So next, we had another poll in mind along the lines of this question that asks, for those of you who are running girls programs, who are interested in doing a girls initiative, who would like to start working with a girls group, what are some of the question I'd like to present to the participants is what is the challenge that you're facing in organizing an initiative with girls in your community? So the poll is open. We're going to have 3 minutes for the poll, and we'll wait for your responses and have another brief discussion afterwards. I'll just mute my microphone while we receive everyone's input. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your questions about what you have about organizing in your girls initiative. So one of them was shared by Roisin on the chat, and you're struggling for ideas with the first session. Maybe we'll read all of the questions first, and then we'll start to address them. And so you're looking for activities for the first session and types of icebreakers and how to keep the first session fun and light. Great question. And some of the other questions, things that people are dealing with are promotion, getting girls, parents, and teachers informed that the program exists and is available. Others dealing with outreach challenges as well, that girls are so busy and they have many other activities and commitments. And also seeking other partner groups probably to assist with delivering the program. There's been turnover in staff in some organizations, and some girls in some groups, there's been very few girls coming at all. So it sounds like that's a common challenge. Finding funding for staffing for after school. And someone sharing that she actually does have quite a few girls aged 8 to 12 who come, and that they really like to come to girls group, but the teenagers going to other programs and organizations are harder to reach. So the age group definitely makes a difference. And another one is about retention. So maybe there's a lot of girls at the beginning, and then that number declines as the weeks go by. Another person was talking about how girls don't know enough about the program itself, and they're worried about meeting other women in the community. So that might be in a rural or small community where they're concerned about confidentiality and privacy, perhaps. So we can touch on some of those. I will talk for a few minutes, and then I'll share with Simone. In terms of getting started, definitely the idea of starting off and going to where the girls are is really important for making sure that they come. So places that are easy for them to get to. Though we have also heard from in some smaller communities that, you know, girls don't really want to lose their sense of privacy, and so there's resistance to kind of showing up. But some of the things that we found really help to get started are to have one sort of mobilizing event. So one of the things that Girls Action does that some of you have already participated in is our National Day of Action around Valentine's Day, where several communities across the country participate in the same week and work with their girls to take action on something that matters to them. So that's kind of a one-off event. Or something like it, where you don't have to commit to being there every week, but it can still have a positive effect on girls' sense of power and their sense of being able to speak up and be heard. Doing just like one workshop, for example, to address a key issue in the community can be a really great way to see if there's momentum and interest. So it could be in partnership with a school, to do something specific with girls around whatever they're dealing with, friendships, if they're younger, or relationship violence, if they're older. Another key is kind of the needs assessment, what we would call the needs assessment, but can be done in a fun way. So having a fun night where it's just about watching a movie and having popcorn, or doing some kind of activity that the girls are interested in, and then throughout the evening create space to say, if you had a regular place like this, if you had a regular space for girls, would you like that? What would you want to do? And then that can be kind of a light way to get started. Other things that we found, if you are like if you're not in, for example, a formal organization and you don't have a lot of support for getting your girls group started, to ask around and form your own personal advisory committee. Of course, that works well if you're in an organization as well. So find others in the community who care and who are interested and who can maybe offer and help you get the resources, motivation, space, and so on that you need, that will help champion and keep you going when it might be challenging. So I'm going to pass off to Simone now to talk about some of the challenges around like opening activities, icebreakers for your first event with girls, and also you know, how to get girls into your program and stay. 1 second.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's really nice to see everyone's inputs and thoughts. Thanks for sharing, and I think that probably looks like we're all asking similar and different questions. So yeah, there are different questions here. I'm going to choose one question around how to start fun activities with girls at the high school level. And often, like, girls who are in high school who are interested in doing a girls group, they may be participating in different programs, multiple programs. How to work with them and how to make your program appealing, I guess, is a question. What's a fun activity? I recommend going to the Girls Action website and looking up the Amplify Toolkit. I find that's a great resource. It's a great starting resource where there's a whole collection of icebreakers and get-to-know-you activities that don't require a lot of resources. But really, it's just a matter of, you know, finding that hook, finding that one or two girls who you do have a connection with, who you can speak honestly with, and asking them what they're interested in. I usually start with the group agreement to set the space, but then a fun activity where they can move around and interact with each other is important also. But at the high school level, it can be challenging, and sometimes we find that maybe not doing like a program year-round is helpful because they do have exams, there's a lot of extra stress, and we tend to do kind of like workshop series or, you know, 3 activities that have like a positive result, like a photography project. That works very well for us at the high school level. And beginning your workshops sometimes with hooks as well, like with songs, with music, with TV shows, media clips, and start to deconstruct the messages that are in those media clips. There's like a very accessible way to start kind of discussing about the messages that girls receive from mainstream society. So again, like work with their interests. Then I recommend the Amplify Toolkit. But you know, you may be wanting to work with girls who are a little bit less active in the high school, or maybe girls who are not in high school or who have different familial responsibilities. And so, like Juniper said, depending on the community you're in, there are different ways of reaching out to the girls, and it depends on, you know, how many participants you're hoping for. But you know, there are members in our network who work in communities where there are not a lot of girls, but there are girls who are interested in, who enjoy the girls program, and those organizers will go pick them up from school or pick them up from home, find those informal spaces to meet at a coffee shop. It doesn't have to be a program where it's highly structured and you have a big group of 20 girls. But that kind of like touches on also another issue that someone else brought up, which is like, you know, funding and staffing and how to get those leaders in your communities who are willing to organize and facilitate a group, who are able to, you know, facilitate a group. You know, how can you find the time to do this? Well, the good thing about popular education is that, you know, you can work it out with the girls while you're in the group. Of course, you know, there's certain things that you need to plan for. Like, I recommend always having food. That's a great way of getting teens and girls to participate in your programs, doing community suppers, having juice boxes and granola bars, and those are types of resources that organizations are willing to donate in kind and don't necessarily cost a lot. So those are getting juice and snack bars you can, you know, hopefully try and find in kind. And in terms of facilitating and you know, finding staff, I recommend looking at local universities or colleges or high schools, because often there are internship programs and there are folks who do want to volunteer, and it's just about giving them the right guidance to be able to do it. And it is important to have someone who can work with the girls on an ongoing basis. So ask yourself how much of a commitment you need, and you know, maybe doing 3 workshops with girls, it actually can have a great result. It doesn't necessarily have to be year round, and you can work with the same group of girls, you know, twice a year. So those are some ways of kind of doing a scaled down, creating a space for girls in a scaled down way that's not, it's easily accessible. So you know what, this is the end of the webinar. It was really great speaking with everyone and seeing all the questions and the inputs. But I am going to pass the mic to Miriam, and before I do that, thank her for hosting this webinar and having Juniper and I come speak. And if anyone ever has questions, it's not hard to find our contact on the Girls Action email. And if anyone has questions about workshop ideas, I'd be happy to geek out. Send me an email and we can talk. I'll pass the mic to Miriam now.
Thank you very much, Juniper and Simone. So that's all the time we had for the presentation. Like I have mentioned, I'm sorry, for those who would like to share this webinar with others, a link to the full presentation and question period will be available online in the next few days, and I will be sending you a link to your personal email. Don't forget to stay in touch with us. We put a slide up. So if you're not a member of our Girls Action Network, you can become a member by filling out a form on our website. You can also stay in touch by signing up for our e-newsletter. You can do that through our website as well. We'd also like to ask you for your feedback on today's presentation. So once you leave this webinar, the pop-up window will appear with a very short survey. We would really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. This is a way to help us continue to improve the webinar experience for all future participants. You can visit our website if you want more information on this. You can find our Amplify Toolkit online. You can participate in more webinars. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and of course, again, subscribe to our newsletter. Again, I would like to thank everyone for attending, and thank you for being with us and for your great feedback and questions. We thank you for filling out the survey, and have a great day. Thank you.